You're listening to the Break Podcast powered by Career Cloud.
If I spend time thinking about how I speak and the message that I try to get across, I can craft a great message, and that means I'm a great communicator. You go to Toastmasters, learn how to give a presentation, read books on communication, say all the right words. You can say all the right words and they can still be misinterpreted. That's the assumption that really got flipped on the head, is no matter how well I craft my message, I prepare my message, I cannot guarantee that it will be interpreted in the way that I want. So what the brief back does is it pulls that interpretation out into the open, right? And I mentioned you got to bring something from the military. There's a good way and a bad way. A terrible way is, hey, Mike, can you tell me what I just told you? I want to make sure you were listening to me. You will think I'm an asshole. You won't want to work with me. And you will create all sorts of other problems, or we will create all sorts of other problems, even if it solves the miscommunication. What you can do instead is keep it totally focused on yourself.
This episode is sponsored by ZipRecruiter. If you need a change and are looking for a new job, or if you're looking to hire for your small business, please check out ZipRecruiter today. Their smart technology matches the right candidates to the right jobs and sends new opportunities right to your inbox. They make finding a job or hiring the right person easier than ever. ZipRecruiter, the smarter way to hire. Try ZipRecruiter for free today by going to ziprecruiter.com and tell them I sent you. Jason, welcome to the show. So glad you're here. How are you today?
Great, Mike. Thanks for having me.
All right. I am really excited for this conversation. I love what you're about. I think we're on a very similar wavelength. And as I always start these conversations, I want to remind our audience that the break is about moments that change us, moments that change our trajectory or our viewpoint of ourselves, and are catalysts for us going on to do something different. So from my research, I know you were a pretty hard-charging type A guy. You were in a startup, and we're going to talk about a little bit of your history in the show a little bit later here. But I want to talk about the moment that really changed you about 5 years ago. Can you talk to us about what happened and what transpired since then?
Yeah, for sure. And I would still call myself kind of hard-charging, and I got a lot of things I want to achieve. And I think what we'll get into, which will be, fun to really unpack, is the way that I go about it is very different. And I was in that very traditional, at least for me, kind of type A mindset of like, there's some pot of gold at the top of the mountain. And it doesn't matter how heavy or how hard or how far, I'll just grit my teeth and bear it the whole way up there. And it'll be great once I get there kind of mentality. And 5 years ago, my only sister, Rachel, was diagnosed with cancer. Really out of nowhere. My parents were actually on vacation when it happened, and I got a call, from my sister saying, "Hey, I'm in the emergency room. Like, I don't know what's going on. Can you come?" Just like thinking about it is, it's 5 years ago, but some parts kind of feel like it was yesterday. And I got to the hospital and was with her for a couple of days. I had to call my parents and have like the hardest phone conversation of my life, where I had to tell them that their daughter, my sister, is here and this is what the doctors suspect. And I don't know, you got to get home. And, that was kind of 9 months before she passed away. And it was hard for all the reasons you could imagine. And, I struggled to deal with it, as I think anyone would. And if I could take all of the things that I've learned between then and now and give them back to get her, like in a heartbeat, I would do it. However, the way that I am really trying to kind of carry her forward is it has become a huge positive driver in the way that I live my life. And for a long time, I felt a lot of guilt about that. How could my sister passing away turn into positive change for me? But it has. And rather than trying to ignore it, I'm trying to embrace it and share some of the lessons that I've learned. And the big thing that it did is I out of a position of collapse, I got rid of all of my preconceptions. It was just like, I am not coping. I need to figure something out. I was in a startup at the time, a company that I joined. There was, two other people, half a slide deck, nothing else. We had built the team. We had raised money. We were growing well. It was very exciting, but a lot of pressure. I had my first kid at the time. He was young. sister got sick and it's just like, can't handle it all. And so all the preconceptions went out the window. And the way that I dealt with the grief after she passed was really flipping over every assumption about the way I was living my life. First, life, in the more traditional sense of outside of work. And then more holistically, like, well, what's going on at work and how's that factoring into my life? And it completely changed the way I think about my life and how I apply myself at work and the impact that that has on, who and what and where and how I am.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I know that was a really difficult moment. I can't imagine. I've never been close to that. But I can see through your story how a moment like that makes you reconsider, kind of in a flash, like rethink your approach to life.
Yeah, I wish I had figured it out in a flash. Unfortunately, it took a little bit longer, but I learned, therapy is one of these things where I'd always felt like, oh, that's for weaker people that can't deal with their problems. I'm not proud of that mindset, but that's, if I'm honest, how I thought about it. One of the many things I did is, start going to therapy, which I highly recommend. And not just if you think you have a quote unquote problem, it's great, as just to keep the bike tuned up, so to speak. But one of the things I learned there that I didn't really know is, pretty much everybody knows about post-traumatic stress, right? It's in the media, it's all over the place. A lot of people suffer from it, unfortunately. I didn't know that there was something called post-traumatic growth. And, I consider myself fortunate that I'm one of the lucky few who, I had a trauma in my life and the result was a huge amount of growth that came out of the other end of it. It took years. It's still happening now, but it was certainly the moment that kicked the whole thing off.
Well, one of the interesting parts about post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic growth is, to me at least, and I'm certainly not a psychologist by any means, but like you, I've dabbled. I read a lot about the subjects. The difference is in the stories that we tell ourselves, and the meaning that we assign in the moment, but then also the meaning that we change to that particular event. And I think in the moment, it's very stressful. It's very hard to think about how anything good could come of that. Such a terrible thing. But over time, with the help of therapy or with the help of peers and mentors and family, like, you can start to tell yourself a different story and you can start to use that event in different ways. And that's just really a hat tip to the plasticity and the range of our brains and our emotions to be able to change things like that. What were some of the stories that you maybe told yourself as a young man, as an ambitious young person before this event happened? What was life like? What was success like for you at that moment?
Well, I don't think I ever hit it. So, I think...
what was your concept of it?
Yeah, it was always, for me, I think a lot about prioritization. And I've always been pretty clear on my priorities. I think where I was falling down was the way I was actually living my priorities. So I'll give you a concrete example. I care a lot about my family, as most people do, right? And I was working very hard in my career. And I always said, listen, my top priority is my family. And what I meant by that is, if I'm sitting in a work meeting and I get a call from the doctor because one of my kids is there, I'm going to leave the work meeting no matter what's going on, and I'm going to pick up the phone, right? And what I didn't realize was that's kind of the most extreme negative side. And then there's everything else above that. What happens in a normal day-to-day? What are you thinking about long-term? And so my long-term prioritization was, I'm working... What's the language barrier on this? Can I say ass? Are we going to edit that out later? I'm working my ass off now and I'm pulling crazy hours and I'm not enjoying some of the things I'm doing and I'm stressing, I'm missing that, but I'm doing it because it's going to help me achieve something in the future that's going to create some unlock for my family. And I'm doing it all for us and for the family. And I genuinely believe that. And it was, it wasn't like, I need to achieve some pinnacle so I can feel great about myself. It's like, this is something I'm trying to accomplish for us. Meanwhile, the day-to-day prioritization decisions don't always line up in the way that I want them to. And today what's flipped is the priority's the same. The family's still at the top, but I'm making more regular day-to-day decisions in alignment with that prioritization. What's going on with my kids? What time am I going to finish today? How do I make sure that I'm here for that event or this event? I color code my calendar by how movable a session is. And that helps me just keep track of like, if I have to move something, and I'll put a thing for one of my kids and it's as immovable as, something in the past that was, very work related, and I'll move things around it, whenever it might be. And that was a big shift for me of just, I'm assuming that I'm doing all this stuff for some future state. I can't control whether that future state happens, nor do I know if I will even be there. So maybe stop putting all of the eggs in the future basket and start putting some in the present basket. And I think that was a big shift for me when my mentality really shifted around, not so much fully focused in the future, still somewhat, but a little bit more what's going on in the present. Are you enjoying what you're doing right now? If you're not enjoying it, what's the point?
It's interesting. It brings up a couple of things. Like, number one, the question of, yes, I don't think I don't think anyone would say you weren't a family man or that wasn't your top priority, but acknowledgement or thinking about what are the actual activities and outcomes that my family actually cares about, that benefits, that betters them. I'm assuming your kid at 4 years old or whatever, however old he was, wasn't saying, yeah, if my dad gets me to this, big exit with his company, like, we're going to be better off. He wants to spend more time with you. He wants to see you more. Is that fair? And did that realization happen because of your sister's death, or was that a different type of realization?
Yeah, it didn't really come driven by the kids, in that, like, they're probably still too young to be able to like vocalize it in that kind of a way. I'd like to say it came through a moment of like brilliant insight that I had. It was more like a slow build, and then you look back. And what I realized is I was kind of going through the motions, like I was there doing the things and prioritizing stuff. But there's a big difference between, rolling up to a daycare to pick up your kid on a business call until the absolute last possible second when you're like just getting in the door, and then you hang it up. You're like, okay, dad mode now. Like, there's a big difference between that and not being on a call, walking and like releasing all that and showing up as the like person that you want to be in that moment. And what I realized is it was really important for me to focus on what things I wanted to do, but how do I want to show up for people in this moment? I know you've got kids. It's challenging to be a parent, when there's all sorts of other stresses and stuff piled on over top. How are you showing up for people? How are you showing up in that moment? Not just are you there? Was I present for said activity? Was I present as the person that I want to be? Not rumbling away at a work problem at that moment, and vice versa for my team and stuff I'm doing at work. If there's stuff going on outside of the office, am I showing up for my team in the way that I want to? And that's something that I learned over time that, created some of the shifts in what I'm doing today.
Yeah. So it sounds like maybe a shift from like future outcome driven to really, how can I be more aligned today and now? What can I control? What type of agency do I have in my actions today that can give me a better life, better quality, better alignment with what I want, versus waiting for some outcome to be the driver of that integration and fulfilling that I'm doing it all for my kids. Talk to us a little bit about what you've learned from the agency side of things, maybe.
Yeah, I think agency is an important word, right? So if we take that like outcome orientation, I think that, we all set goals. We think about goals. We think about where the outcome is going to be. And, one of the things I did is I went in a very like Tim Ferriss-y experiment with my whole life mode. And we could talk about all that stuff if it's interesting. But one of the things I did at work was I flipped over every assumption about how I was working, and goals are a very central part of this. And I started asking myself, well, what would happen if I set no goals? Which scared me like crazy, because you're supposed to have a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan and a 1-year plan. So I'm like, no goals for a year, 0. Let's see what happens. Can you run a team with no goals? What if you only set goals, more goals, micro goals all over the place? Like, I experimented with all this stuff, and like, I'm a bit of an armchair psychologist, and I'm reading every book I can get my hands on. I was reading probably, 100 odd books a year, every year for quite a long period there. And the thing about being outcome oriented is there's a couple of challenges with it. The first is this agency point that you brought up. So no matter how much you try, you do not control whether or not an outcome happens. So I can do everything right. I can run this plan perfectly and do all the right things. But because I don't control the universe, I might not hit the outcome that I want. Vice versa, I could do everything in my definition wrong, and the outcome could happen to me, and that'd be great. And, I didn't want my sister to get sick. No one was trying to have that happen. It was the first real thing in my life where I got faced with the fact that, like, no matter what you do here, you can't change the outcome. Right? This is just a fact of life. There's nothing you can really do. And once I stared that down and like it internalized, it was like, well, I'm hanging my happiness on whether or not I accomplish a thing that is not entirely, whether or not I accomplish a thing that is out of my control. I can do everything right and not get there. And why shouldn't I feel good about that? If I do all the right things and I feel great about the way that I'm working, and for some reason, maybe there's like a giant pandemic and everyone's plans get flipped on their head, you don't accomplish the thing you were trying to accomplish. Yeah, okay, I'm not necessarily going to be overjoyed, but that doesn't mean that the time I spent working along this is like wasted, or I shouldn't have enjoyed myself on the way. That's kind of thing one. Thing two is this idea that you're going to accomplish something and then everything's going to be great. We all have this. It's like ground in our brains, I think. And what's also ground in our brains is this concept of hedonic adaptation, which basically like tells you that your brain has a set point. And whatever happens, you go back to the set point. And so this is a double-edged sword. The good thing about it is if something terrible happens in your life, in most cases, you will rebound back up to your set point. It's going to take you time and be painful and whatever, but like you will level off at whatever your average happiness or whatever you want to call it was before the thing happened. The flip side that can be challenging is when you accomplish something big, you hit a big milestone, you get a big promotion, you nail a big business thing, the same thing happens. You feel great for a month or a week, or in my case, 15 minutes until you start thinking about the next thing you need to accomplish and you crash back down to earth. And so that's not actually driving a lot of what can actually make me, you, whoever feel better. And my big switch was, well, what do I actually have control over? That's how I'm working every day. And a lot of the strategies that are out there are focused on what you're doing. Get this mythical dream job that you're somehow supposed to enjoy for the rest of your life, land this promotion, everything will be great, get on this new project, it will be amazing. But what happens is you have a honeymoon phase, and then because you haven't changed the way that you're working, all of your old problems come rushing back to you in a new situation, and you wind up feeling pretty much the same as you did in the old. Maybe you're just making a little bit more money, but even that, the benefit of that goes away over time too. So I completely shift my energy into smaller changes on how I'm showing up and what I'm doing day to day, and how these actually add up to feeling great more of the time.
So I want to dig into this subject here, because as I was telling you before the show started, like we speak the same language, and I know I talk to a lot of people and I help them quit corporate work. You're kind of talking and coming from this angle of, well, a lot of what can make us happy is just how we show up. And I completely agree with this. I don't think everybody needs to quit. I don't even think 30% of people need to quit a job and do their own thing to attain this happiness or freedom or these feelings that we're talking about. So much of it is about how we approach the situation that we're in and controlling the controllables and exerting our agency over the process of what we're doing, which is exactly what you're talking about, which is why I love this topic and I want to dig in here. So talk to us about maybe a couple of the other assumptions that you flipped over on their heads throughout this process, because I think a lot of people, we sort of have this just default mindset of what work is and how we get fulfillment. But there's something led you down the path of, no, it's me. It's changing my approach to how I show up that you've learned over time. And so I want to give our audience a little bit of a window into what are the actual drivers of happiness? If it's not outcome oriented, let's say, what are the drivers?
Yeah, so I got this thing, like, if you want to be happier, or where should you focus? Like, focus on moments, not milestones, right? And thinking about your moment. And so you asked, like, what are some assumptions I flipped on their head? There were three. We could talk about all of them. There were more than three, but three kind of came, top of mind to me. And I'll let you pull whichever thread feels the most interesting, or you can pull all three. The first was that I was too busy. I have to get everything done. No space for anything else. The second was that I have to add things, and that's going to result in some kind of improvement. And the third is that I was planning right. And there was just a plan that needed to exist and a way to plan. And I learned that their approach to planning needs to change. Any of those kind of jump out at you? I know they're a little bit open at the moment, but
all of them.
You're listening to the Break Podcast, powered by Career Cloud.
This episode is sponsored by ZipRecruiter. If you need a change and are looking for a new job, or if you're looking to hire for your small business, please check out ZipRecruiter today. Their smart technology matches the right candidates to the right jobs and sends new opportunities right to your inbox. They make finding a job or hiring the right person easier than ever. ZipRecruiter, the smarter way to hire. Try ZipRecruiter for free today by going to ZipRecruiter.com and tell them I sent you. I want to start with the middle one, the adding.
Okay.
So I love this one. I talk about this principle of inversion, and I talk about how, subtraction is more robust than addition, all of this kind of stuff. Yeah. So talk to me about this addition piece. Like, where did that assumption come from maybe? And then how did you deconstruct it and flip it?
Yeah. Okay, great. So this one kind of exists at all levels. We can add more project, more work, more whatever.
Right.
We'll put that aside for a sec, and I'll just talk about the learning I had from the experimentation I did. And like I said, there was a period of years where I kept a tracker. I was reading all these books, productivity hack, lifestyle hack, health hack, like you name it. I tried it for some number of weeks, and I have graphs, looking at, like, did it make an impact in my life? And the benefit was, at first, particularly about work, I thought that in order to improve things, I had to add. I had to get more control, more agency, more decisions, more projects, more authority, more autonomy, more ownership, looking for ways to add. How do I do this productivity hack that figures out a way for me to add more time into more efficiency into my time, whatever it might be? What I learned by looking back at the trends was actually the biggest impacts that I was feeling was when I used a tactic that removed an impediment from my enjoyment, productivity, what have you. And that was like a surprising one for me. And there's a lot of them. We can talk about a few, but why it was really powerful is it's when you're removing stuff, you usually have a lot of agency over it. One of the classic examples I use is, what's the best way to jump into this particular topic? Okay. Here's a fun guess. $1.2 trillion. Okay. Let's just pretend that that's a GDP, right? How much a country is producing in a year. Do you want to guess how many countries have a GDP higher than $1.2 trillion? It's a fun guessing game. People on listening can try to guess right now as you're thinking too.
Like 3.
Okay, I think there's about 16, but not a lot. Okay, not a lot. I think it's like Spain and Indonesia will need to fact check me that are like right in that 1.2. My point has nothing to do with GDP. $1.2 trillion is the amount of money that the United States of America wastes every year due to workplace miscommunications. If you break down those numbers, because 1.2 trillion is like an unimaginably large number, that works out to a full day of lost productivity for every person every single week. Everybody knows what this feels like. When you have a miscommunication with someone at work, it sucks. It's super frustrating because you don't find out about it until after you go away and do all the work. And it frustrates you and you get stressed about it. Big driver of it. It's something like, I think 1 in 4 people will cite miscommunications as in the workplace as a primary reason why they're looking for another job. Something like 70% of people can report on a very specific, very recent miscommunication. So if you can just find a way to stop miscommunicating at work, you will feel way better at work because it's costing you a huge amount of time, frustration, and energy. And stuff like this, I didn't figure out until I kind of look back in retrospect. And it's overlooked because it's like a paper cut. You waste 15 minutes on a Monday and 20 minutes on a Tuesday and half an hour on a Wednesday and then 2 hours on a Thursday. It adds up over the course of your week. And it feels so commonplace that until you notice it and you know to look for it, you don't even know it's happening. And this thing that you have a lot of agency over is just whittling you away. And you don't need to add anything new. Just get that out of your way and you will feel way better. And you'll be way more productive too.
So can you give an example of like something that you removed?
Miscommunications.
How?
Yeah. So if that's a thing that you want to get rid of, when you do a bunch of research into it, if you're a big nerd on this stuff like I am, and you think about it, you're like, hey, well, we know this is a problem as a species. Okay. Most people in kindergarten probably had a moment where they played broken telephone. You tell the first kid whispers to the second kid, and yada, yada down the line. And then the last kid says a thing that is so different from the first kid that everybody breaks out laughing, including the teacher. So that part's not shocking. We're not very good at communicating, right? You can do this with adults and roughly the same thing happens. The shocking part is nobody then teaches you how to fix this problem because you're about to go out into the world and have to communicate as like one of the most important things you have to do. Meanwhile, we just had a big laugh that we suck at it and did nothing about it. Okay. And so why don't we teach this? It turns out if you do a bunch of research into like the most risky environments where if we have a miscommunication, you pay the greatest price, loss of life, soldiers, doctors, high voltage power supply, jobs like this, you can't afford a miscommunication.
Right.
And so they've come up with a methodology to, as near as makes no difference, to eliminate it. And with soldiers, it's called a brief back. And when I found it, I was like, oh my God, why is this not a thing how am I just learning about this now? And the challenge there is that the tactics out there, I didn't know about it. And you have to find a way to bring it into an office setting. That's what was really challenging about it, because you can't take something that's made for the military and plug it into like your tech company or whatever it is you might be doing and have it work. There's a bit of like organ donor rejection there. So you got to find the right way to do it. And we can talk about that. I just want to be mindful of like, I just did a whole ramble, and let's see if you want to go in a different direction.
Yeah, I think we're gonna move on. But that makes a ton of sense. Like the idea that like removing something has all sorts of positive downstream effects. You get back your time, you get back a lot of your focus. You don't have to worry about that thing. Everything gets more efficient on down the line instead of trying to continuously add a Band-Aid over a problem every single time. That gets bloated. We all kind of get the gist there. The other one I wanted to ask about, and then I want to dig into really the book that you're writing and how you're bringing all of this stuff together. But the other one is the planning one. I have a few thoughts, but I want you to explain how you overturned that idea and what you learned from it.
Okay, cool. And I think if people are interested in how can I get rid of miscommunications, they can check out the book, or maybe we can kind of circle back around
at
the end, and I can share a very specific tactic that folks can use. The planning idea is basically, I do a lot of work with teams. You know, I kind of had this for myself a couple of years ago. We spend a lot of time really focused on what we want to accomplish, right? And that's usually, once we have all the what's clear, what and when, you know, then we're like, we're done. There's the plan. So we need to do X, Y, and Z in order to accomplish this thing, right? I'm releasing a book. I need some kind of a marketing plan. What are the things I'm going to do? Off we go. We don't spend a lot of time planning for how we want it to feel going from A to B. And it's this how part that can have such a huge impact. So a lot of the pushback I will usually hear from folks is, well, I have a lot of things I need to accomplish. I can't just change my job, right? My boss needs me to do X, Y, and Z. It's fine. You know, I'm not saying that you need to change what you need to accomplish. The push I'm making in the book is change the way in which you accomplish the things you already need to do. So for me, there's a million and one ways that you can market a book launch. I love meeting new people. It's been great getting to know you. I got to hear about your kids. We're having a chat right now. Yeah. This is what I really like to do. And so when I think about what I need to accomplish, X amount of media impressions as an example, leading up to a book launch, then I think about, well, how do I want to accomplish that? Well, I could buy Google ads. I could write articles in newspapers. I could, you know, yada, 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 or do podcasts. And for me, because I really enjoy it, it's like, well, I'm going to go the podcast route. And that's going to be part of my mix because I could do other things, but I'm really going to enjoy this. I'm going to feel great. And it's going to move me towards this place that I'm trying to go. And so it's taking the concept of planning and not removing the what, which you absolutely need to do, but carving off some small percentage of the time you would spend planning to think strategically upfront about how do I want this to feel? Is it going to be a big sprint with my head down? It's going to suck for 2 weeks and then I'll come out the other end and, you know, we'll change things up. Do I want this to feel a bit more relaxed? Do I want to do these kind of activities or those kinds of activities? Thinking more about the way in which you want to go from point A to point B. Kind of like how you have Google Maps on your phone, you put in a destination and you get options. Are you going to drive? Do you want it to be the most economical route? Do you want to take public transit? Do you want to walk? You're picking how, and the way you go from A to B is going to have a huge impact on your experience. Same kind of thing. Just carve out a little bit from what and spend some time on the how.
And I like the idea of this because you can start to think about like aligning those hows with your unique advantages, what you're best at, what you enjoy most, what you get more out of the process. Like that's what you're really trying to do is start to enjoy the process of living, the process of working, because the outcome is not guaranteed. So I love that piece of it. The question I have, or maybe the pushback I have, is how do we get people to listen to themselves in those moments more? I think a lot of people come from this analytical, logical mind. Okay, we just have to do this thing. I need to sacrifice to do this. It can't just be easy. It's not about me and what I like. It's all of that stuff is fluffy. Like I have to just do the thing and be a robot. But you're talking about kind of really tapping into this like intuition about yourself. So how do we split that hair?
Yeah, I would say making the intuition more explicit is really helpful. So a lot of times, I think the assumption that you can't both enjoy it and work hard for a thing is, I don't believe in it. I don't buy it, right? You have to hold yourself, I think, to a higher standard. And when I think about times in my past that I really enjoy, it's not often the like, wow, that was such an easy stretch of time. You know, some of the most enjoyable times I've had as a professional are in like serious crunch mode. You know, the team is like tight and jamming and something's broken or there's a big launch coming and everyone's working really hard and crazy hours. And, you know, you come out the other end and you're like, that was a very rewarding, very fulfilling, you know, time for me. And what I tried to unpack was, well, what was it about that made it great? How do I get some of that in advance? And that's where you can start to show people that, you know, you're kind of sneaking the medicine in. You know, it's like, exactly. This is the medicine you need to take, and we're sneaking it in with a bunch of honey. when I work with folks and when I talk to people, and what you'll read about in the book is how keep all the objectives you need to hit. Let's just find another way to get there. And what I've seen is, both for myself and other folks, we often don't know what our own best practices are. And I really dislike this term best practices. Best practices are so incredibly like related to the person. What's best for me and best for you are unlikely to be the same thing. I might be somebody who, you mentioned like analytical, maybe I like spreadsheets, and I'm really great with numbers. I like pulling out really deep analysis. And somebody else is a really great storyteller, and they're great at making a PowerPoint presentation and getting up in front of people and talking. Both of those people could get a job to do of like, I need you to report back to the team about this project that we just did on Friday. And if the second person had to do it by building a spreadsheet and sending a deep technical analysis, they would not enjoy it. And if the first person had to do it by giving a big presentation, it wouldn't be great for them. But they could do it in their own unique ways, and both of them can accomplish the objective. The challenge is we don't really take time to think about, well, what are the things that I am actually really great at? What do I really enjoy doing? Am I spending any time doing those things? And questions like these are easy to ask. They just take a little bit of time, to answer. And I can give people a test they can run for themselves at home if you're interested, to see how much they do or don't know.
Yeah, let's go with that. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so it's a relatively simple test. Take out a piece of paper. Okay, you fold it in half. Whatever the term be, lengthwise. So you've got a tall, skinny piece of paper.
Yep.
You start a 2-minute timer. You're going to write down 10 things your smartphone is great at. When you're done, the timer beeps. You're going to flip the piece of paper over so you're on the other folded side. And then you're going to write down 10 things that you are really great at. 2 minutes. I will bet you that your list of things your smartphone is really great at, you will either have finished it substantially faster than 2 minutes, or it will be really, really long. And when you look at the list of things that you're really great at, it will either be really, really short, or you were still thinking at the end of the 2 minutes about, what else could I put on this list? I know more about what my smartphone does well than what I do really well. That is going to make it very, very hard to guide yourself day to day. And then once you've done that exercise, a similar version of that exercise is take that piece of paper of what you do really well, write down what you enjoy doing, right? Grab another piece of paper, open up your calendar, and write down all the things you did last week. And then compare those two lists. How many of the things that you're really great at, that you really enjoy doing, did you actually spend any meaningful time on last week? And if you want to make a small change tomorrow, do 5 minutes more of a thing that you really enjoy. Or find a way to do that project in a way that you're already really great at. I'm good at giving presentations. I'm going to make a presentation for this. Small thing. Doesn't need to change the work that you need to do. It just changes how you do it. So you can run the little iPhone test with the paper folding and see what happens. And if you're like most people, you will wind up with how we just described.
I love that test. And I would, if I had 100 people in front of me, I'm betting hard money that it would wind up the way that you described for the vast majority of people. Why?
Yeah.
Why is that such an issue for us?
How often have you stopped to think about what you're great at? It feels like fluff, right? You're a type A, you want to achieve stuff. You don't have time for this. You got to think about like how you're going to accomplish that next big objective that you have.
Yeah. It's the result that matters. It doesn't matter what I think of myself. It's the result that matters.
That's right. But it's not just when you unpack the logic, I think it's highly logical, but I had never taken the time to unpack the logic. I'm already great at this thing.
Yeah.
So if I leverage this skill I'm really great at to accomplish this objective I have, won't the probability of success go up?
Yeah.
So why haven't I done that in the past? It's because I've been so focused on the outcome and the things I need to do until somebody I got lucky, a mentor of mine, opened up my eyes and he ran me through a different version of this exercise. But it just helped me see that like the things that I enjoy doing are not the things that I'm actually doing week to week and day to day.
Right.
Why is that happening? There has to be a way to channel more of what I'm great at and enjoy to these existing tasks I need to do.
Right. Unpacking the logic that's such a great term because you're exactly right. It is logical. All this stuff is logical. How you feel about something, wanting to do more of that, enjoy the process. It all makes you better. It increases your odds of having a good life, having good experiences, having good outcomes. But we don't think that way. I mean, it just reminds me of 2018. I was at a crossroads trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I was like, I don't know what I'm good at. I kind of felt that way. Right. So I'm intimately aware of this feeling. And I just created an entire, basically map exercise, I call it advantage mapping. I was like, how do I figure out what my advantages are? Not just what I'm good at, but like advantages. And how do I stack those together into a really solid foundation? So I know that going forward, whatever I do, if I align what I'm interested in with these advantages, like I have a pretty high odds chance of succeeding. Like that's how I thought about it. But the advantages themselves were, turns out, what moves the needle? Well, it's more fluffy things like interest, like energy, what gives you energy versus takes away your energy, as opposed to just expertise and things like that. So it's merging in a very logical way, things that we wouldn't normally consider logic. I love that. I love that approach. All right. The book. So you had this experience with your sister that changed your relationship with work, or how you thought about work and living life and what matters. And all of the work that you've done, you're compiling, so to speak, into this book that you're writing. What was the impetus for this book? And what is the title of the book?
Your Grass is Greener.
Yes.
It's, the whole premise is we're always looking at somebody else's grass and saying, oh, it's greener over there. Like, pay attention to the grass you have, water where you're at, and it's going to get better, basically. The impetus for it, and, I still get a lot of imposter syndrome just when people are like, oh, you wrote a book. I'm like, that's odd. I don't feel like an author. I don't feel like I fit in with that, but it's the thing I'm still working on. And one of the reasons why I'm proud of the book is it's like, I want to say it's one of, but it might be the only thing in my career that I have done purely out of creative interest and desire. I didn't start writing a book because I was like, I'm going to go and become a best-selling author and sell this many books and make this much money and turn it into this kind of business opportunity. It really came from, I was experimenting with all sorts of life hacks. And then I brought that into the office, and my team, who was amazing, was just like, what are you doing, man? Like, what are all these things? And when a tactic I was trying would start to work, they would be asking me questions about it. And I would start helping them with it. And I started to see it was really helping them. And then I thought, can I help more people here? And that turned into now what I do, helping, executives who are still very high achievers, both how to achieve more and enjoy it more along the way. And when I really worked with them, it forced me to hone what I had learned. And they started giving me feedback saying, where are you getting this stuff from? I'm not reading this online in a blog. I haven't seen this anywhere else. Where's it coming from? Is there a book I can read? I was like, no, it's built on the back of some of these things over here, but stuff that I kind of experimented my way into, so to speak. So they started to say, hey, I think you should write it down. So I built a course. I thought that's what I was going to do because I was like, I'm not an author. I'm going to build a course. I built the whole course. All I had to do was put it up into the world, and I couldn't do it. I was just like, I'm not interested in putting it out into the world in this way. And like, I don't want to go and funnel traffic to a course and try to sell it with no human interaction at all. And so I wanted to experiment a little bit. And someone said, why don't you write it down? I was like, okay. I wrote a chapter. I sent it to 10 people, 15 people. The feedback was amazing. And by that, I don't mean, you're the best author ever, man. This is amazing stuff. I mean, there was some kernels of, this is really interesting, and also a lot of helpful, very constructive criticism. And I really like that. Just the job of trying to take this concept and figure out how to tell it to someone in a way that is both enjoyable for them, because business, self-help, whatever books are usually, in my opinion, they can be pretty boring. How do I explain it to you in a way that's enjoyable so it sticks, and so that it's like highly applicable? And I had a rule, like, if you can talk or type, you can use my tactics. You shouldn't need anything else beyond that. And so the struggle of trying to get it into that shape, I really liked. And I got about 80% of the way through the book, needed some help, reached out to a bunch of different folks, got really lucky. One of the editors of Atomic Habits jumped onto the project with me, and it then just kind of snowballed from there. So I'm sitting in a position now that I've written a book. I know that I put a chunk of time into it, but it wasn't like this intentional, I want to go and be an author, wouldn't that be cool kind of a thing. It was like, I want to get this stuff out, and this is an interesting way for me to do it.
Excellent. So the core idea of this book is like, it's about transforming kind of that underlying approach to work, so that whatever job you're in, whatever you're doing, it instantly just sort of gets better, right? It's taking an approach to the act of work where you spend tons of time, all of your time, basically, and can be such a source of inspiration and creativity and meaning in your life, and just making that better. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, exactly. So much out there. What's interesting to me is, as I was unintentionally, researching for the book before I knew I was going to write a book, but I was reading all these books and looking at all this stuff. They're all focused on, like, what is the job that you have? How do you get a better job? Right? Like, how do you, carve up the little bits and bits of your time so you can fit more things into it? And what I learned and what I became very passionate about sharing is like, no, it's about how you're working. You can certainly change all the stuff around what you're doing, but if you can just change the how, if you can approach the way you're working a little bit differently, work can get better for you. And when work gets better for you, you enjoy it more, you perform better, you're happier in your life overall. When that's happening, you enjoy your job more, you work better at it. It's like this awesome positive flywheel that's just kind of spinning up. So it's basically like 9 chapters. It is 9 of some of the most common workplace challenges, very, very tactical solutions. And in most cases, like, why we're all just kind of approaching it in the wrong way, a different way to think about the problem that leads to a tactic to help solve this very, very common problem, like miscommunication, like slow decision making, like imposter syndrome, like not loving your job, things like that.
So give us an idea of a couple of the chapters. Like, what are some of the big challenges that you tackle here? And then, we talk, you've mentioned a bunch of times working differently, approaching something differently. What do we mean? What are we talking about concretely? Give maybe a couple examples.
Yeah, so let's go to the brief back example, just because we talked about it earlier, and we can like tie a nice bow around this one. So I had a moment I was very fortunate to be at Airbnb in the earlier days, so I got to see what that was like. And I had a moment where Bruce Springsteen effectively almost crashed my career. And what was happening was we were building out this incredible activation where we were taking a box suite in the stadium in Toronto. We were going to turn it into an Airbnb listing. And a famous Canadian hockey player was going to be the host. And a couple was going to win an opportunity to come and sleep over, which nobody had ever done, in a box that was very corporate that we made look like a Canadian cabin. They would get to watch a hockey game, go to sleep at night. While they're sleeping, the hockey rink gets converted into a basketball court. They wake up in the morning, meet the Toronto Raptors, which is the NBA team, get a crazy experience, watch from courtside. Awesome, huge activation. Big budget, lots of time, many people. Okay? So I'm negotiating this thing, and we're months. The NHL, the NBA, the stadium, like, there's so many, the teams themselves, the contracts, like the minutia that you have to go through to make something like this work. And we've been doing it for months. And we're walking into a meeting where I thought we were pretty much just going to sign the paperwork. Like, it was done. And on the way in, there's usually that like pre-meeting moment. Someone just quickly talk it through, like, Jay, we're really excited. We got the dates booked. It's going to be awesome. And they were separated by 3 days. And to make this thing work, they have to be, the games had to be on back-to-back days, because they're going to go to sleep and wake up. And I'm like, oh my God, this whole thing is going to blow up. What? Why? And they're like, oh, it's no big deal. Don't worry about it. There's just a Springsteen concert and we need a day to set it up. And then he's going to do the concert and then we're going to tear it down. So my first thought is, well, you can't tell a guy nicknamed the Boss to move his concert. Like, no one is going to let that happen. And then I figured the whole thing's torched, like months of negotiation, all this budget, my reputation, all this kind of stuff is just going to go down the tube because the stadium books events out like 2 years out, And all of this happened because I had failed to effectively communicate that they had been on back-to-back, the games had to be on back-to-back days. And it's not like I didn't say it to them, right? I had definitely said something like they have to be back-to-back, but there was a disconnect between the way I explained it and the way they interpreted it. And so later, when I went back after all my experimentation, I thought about that, I realized that I made a fundamental error. And the error, and I think we all know this, is that as human beings, we're different people. And so we interpret things differently. I can say something to you and think one thing, and you think something totally different. Great example of this is, hey, Mike, can you get this done for me by end of day? What does that mean? End of day might mean 5 p.m. Is it 5 p.m. my time zone or your time zone? By end of day, do I mean midnight? Do I mean it just needs to be done before I open my email the next morning? Like, we all know what the words end of day mean, but the way we interpret it is the challenge. And so this is where I really dug deep and realized, well, the brief back is amazing because what the brief back does is it takes this invisible thing, a misunderstanding, right? Where I've said something and you've interpreted it in a way that I couldn't have predicted. And it brings it right up into the moment and it makes it very visible. And so what the brief back does is it says, hey, don't assume that you've been understood. My assumption was if I spend time thinking about how I speak and the message that I try to get across, I can craft a great message, and that means I'm a great communicator. You go to Toastmasters, learn how to give a presentation, read books on communication, say all the right words. You can say all the right words and they can still be misinterpreted. That's the assumption that really got flipped on the head, is no matter how well I craft my message, I prepare my message, I cannot guarantee that it will be interpreted in the way that I want. So what the brief back does is it pulls that interpretation out into the open. Right. And I mentioned you got to bring something from the military. There's a good way and a bad way. A terrible way is, hey, Mike, can you tell me what I just told you? I want to make sure you were listening to me.
Yeah.
You will think I'm an asshole. You won't want to work with me. And you will create all sorts of other problems, or we will create all sorts of other problems, even if it solves the miscommunication. What you can do instead is keep it totally focused on yourself. Hey, Mike, I want to make sure I did a good job getting my point across. Can you let me know what you're taking away from this conversation? Same outcome, completely different way to get there. And the result is it's totally focused on me. I'm not telling you that you can't listen. I'm saying, hey, I want to make sure I did a good job communicating. And you say, yeah, we're going to have hockey and basketball and they just need to be in the same week and it'll all work out great. I'm like, oh boy, hang on a sec. I've dropped the ball here. They actually need to be back to back. Had I used the brief back at our first meeting, I would have saved a huge amount of work. I'm so lucky I worked with this incredible team that figured out a way to find hockey and basketball back to back. The whole thing got saved. It was probably the coolest marketing event I've ever been part of. I don't know if I'll ever do anything cooler than that from a marketing perspective. It got saved, but I almost put the whole thing down the toilet because of a miscommunication. So at work, when you share something with somebody, don't assume that they've understood it. Can you let me know what you're taking away so I can be sure I did a good job getting my point across? And the reverse, when someone's saying a thing to you, don't say, hey, Mike, I'm going to repeat this back because I want to make sure you did a good job communicating. Right. And say, hey, Mike, I want to make sure that I understood you in the way that you intended. I think what you just told me is insert message here. It takes 15 seconds to get that out of your mouth, and you will identify a miscommunication before it ever has a chance to start, and you will save yourself hours of work and tons and tons and tons of frustration. That is chapter 1 of the book. With some more stuff around it.
Yeah, that's a really good example. I love it. I think I talk to my team all the time about adding proper context, especially to written communication. So people don't have to go back and forth to 15 different emails to get all the tidbits of information. It's like, no, take 30 seconds, concisely put down the bullet points of what I need to understand from this entire chain. so I can make a good informed decision and people on the email understand and are reminded why we're doing something. Like all of those things are great. So what happens when like you have a lot of issues come up with culture, right? Like, man, I work for a shitty boss, or the culture, I have a toxic culture. And so I don't enjoy walking into the office, and, every day is a drag. Like, do you have a chapter or two that cover that type of situation in terms of like helping me understand what agency I have in that type of scenario, or how do you approach that problem?
Yeah. And I think, to be clear, I would like to be so positive to say that all situations can be improved, and you can fix any problem that you have. Unfortunately, that's not the way the world works. And so I won't make the argument that everybody can fix what's going on for them. I think that would be very, very naive. The argument I would make is, a lot of times we think we don't have agency when we actually do.
Right.
And so there are certainly situations where, if you are in, you used a very specific word there, if you're in a toxic environment, meaning you are being fundamentally mistreated, that's a moment to like, okay, I've got to change the environment here, because the environment is the problem. The push I'm trying to give folks, though, is to not assume that it's the environment, right? We always have like fundamental attribution bias, right? When things go wrong, it's the environment or somebody else. When they go right, it's because of what I did. So if something's going wrong at the office, it certainly could be the environment. And the way that you can figure it out is to take some agency about the way that you're working, ideally using the things in my book. That'd be great. But if it's with stuff you find elsewhere, that's cool too. Try some stuff. And if you see that it's not working, then you know that it's the environment, because you've taken agency, you've tried to make some changes, and then the only thing left is that it must be the environment. Rather than assuming, as we usually do, that a new job would just fix this problem, a new boss would fix this problem. So if you're in a toxic environment, it's time to make a change. However, how do you figure out whether you're in a toxic environment? What have you tried? What have you tried to shift? And that's what I, do fundamentally try to cover is, here's a couple tactics. You can try all of them over the course of 1 or 2 weeks. And if you don't see something upticking, they're not hard. For me, it was very hard to come up with them. It took me years of experimentation to like figure it out and distill it down. But they're not hard to deploy. It's not hard for you to use a brief back at the office and say, can you let me know what you're taking away from this conversation? I want to make sure I did a good job getting my point across. You could try that tomorrow, and you can see if it helps. And if you try that and 5 or 6 other tactics, and it's been a couple of weeks and nothing's getting better, that might be a really strong signal that like, it's time to make a change. But just move away from the assumption that you're stuck. There's absolutely nothing you can do, because there are things you could try.
Yeah. And it can be, from my experience, like it definitely can be painful, but you don't want to get in a situation where it's, oh, I don't like what's going on right now, so therefore I must go find a new situation. Like, you have to figure, like, no situation is going to be perfect. So you have to try to control what you can control. And you have to do your part to make the situation better, because it's not just you either. There are other people on the team and in the company that don't have as much wherewithal as you, or don't have as much grit maybe. And you got to fight for those people too. Like, the same things are happening to them. But if you can try to make the environment better, or try to make the situation better, then it can help them. And if it doesn't work, then yeah, like, it is an environmental problem. I think the one thing I see the most that's so disheartening for me is when companies say, we want bold ideas. We want you to speak out. We want you to come up with things. It's not about no idea is bad idea. And you go do those things, and then you get trampled, or you end up getting some negative pushback. Like that type of, those cultures that don't have that type of strong psychological safety, I feel like, for innovation and creativity, I think those are the ones that really get people down. Because at the heart, and I agree with you, like, at the heart, everybody is a creative being. We all want to create something. We all want to contribute. And when we're kind of stomped down and paid lip service to that, like, that's a really difficult problem to deal with, I feel like.
What do you tell people when they come to you with that problem?
That's a great question. It's a mindset thing. So I tell people to not wither, number one. Like, you have to, if this is what you feel is right, you have to keep fighting. And if you can't keep fighting, you have to figure out like how ingrained to your identity that creativity is and how big of a problem it is to not have. And then start to look at other options for how you can get more of that, whether that is a different culture, a different industry, or, building a business and completely getting out. Like, that's the type of thing that I see people who are the most stuck have that problem. They're like, I have a calling to create something and I feel completely stifled here.
Yeah, certainly that can be tough without question. And I think you touched on a lot of points that I would totally agree with. And, the mindset I like to think about in those situations is like a very hypothesis driven mindset of, okay, my hypothesis is that I can't be creative in this environment. How do you make that testable? And how do we figure out whether that's true? Because it's very easy to tell yourself a story. I do this to myself all the time. This is the way that it is, and therefore it's the way that it is, because I never think to explore anything else. And one of the most valuable questions that I've ever learned in my life, probably the most valuable question I've ever learned in my life, is what would need to be true? So if we take your example there of, I'm stifled, I can't be creative here. I love pessimism. I think it's highly productive. Yep. I think it gets a bad rap. There's nothing wrong with being pessimistic. I think the challenge is when you're only pessimistic, right? So pessimism is great, and a lot of us have negativity biases. So where it's easy for us to see all the reasons why something won't work, all the reasons why I can't be creative, all the reasons why the things I've tried in the past have failed. That's great. Write that list down. It's also easy to ruminate and get stuck in that list. And that's why I love asking, well, what would need to be true? And when you ask that question, what would need to be true for me to create something here? That's probably going to be a shorter list, but it's going to force you to think about, how could I accomplish this thing that's important to me? And I find when I ask myself that question, what would need to be true? I get like one bullet point in, and then the next bullet point is a reason why I'm pissed and the thing's not working. And I have to remind myself, okay, that's great, Jay. Like, put that in the first column. We're coming back to that later. Suspend your disbelief. What would need to be true for you to be creative in this environment? Write those things down, take your hypothesis and go try them. And it might be true, right? But we often confuse the words like can't and shouldn't, right? Whether you could do something or not, that's a law of physics, right? Am I going to have to break some fundamental law of physics or, break a law in society to accomplish this thing? I don't know. Pretty much everything else you can do is a question of whether you should or you shouldn't. Maybe it's not feasible. Maybe it's not right. You probably can be creative in this environment. The way in which you would need to be creative might not be tenable for you. You might not be like, I'm not about to spend 2 years chipping away at this particular problem in order to be creative in this particular way. That's not interesting to me. But at least you've run the exercise and you've tried a couple things out and you've tested your hypothesis and not just assumed that it's true. So if you get stuck in a rut like that, it's a really great question to flip it on its head and just say, okay, I know all the reasons it won't work. What would need to be true to get me where I want to be? Write that list down, go try a couple of them, and really see whether your hypothesis stands up. And if it winds up being that, like, you tried these things, it's not going to happen, or the feasibility of making it happen is just not something you're prepared to get behind, great. You know what not to do now. You can put that aside and say, how am I going to go and find the right environment? What does that look like? But not just kind of sitting in the negativity and saying, it can't be done. Try to flip it on its head. What would need to be true? Make that list. I've had some incredible things happen to me in my career from that simple question.
You're listening to the Break Podcast, powered by Career Cloud.
This episode is sponsored by ZipRecruiter. If you need a change and are looking for a new job, or if you're looking to hire for your small business, please check out ZipRecruiter today. Their smart technology matches the right candidates to the right jobs, and sends new opportunities right to your inbox. They make finding a job or hiring the right person easier than ever. ZipRecruiter, the smarter way to hire. Try ZipRecruiter for free today by going to ziprecruiter.com and tell them I sent you. I'm laughing. I'm hiding my smiles because literally before I got on this call with you, I did an hour and a half coaching session with my cohort of students, teaching them how to essentially break corporate work, build other ventures, and the whole thing was on this question which you just said. It is one of my favorite questions because it is about digging into the substrate of whatever your first reaction is, and it's focused on conditions. It's focused on the conditions that need to be met in order for something to happen. So it is absolutely one of my favorite, most powerful questions as well. I learned it in venture capital, basically, in terms of you're dealing with uncertainty, you're dealing with the future, you're dealing with things that may or may not come to fruition. Well, what would need to be true in order for me to believe that this, can happen? So I love that question. It's a phenomenal one that everyone should use and employ to become more experimental, more hypothesis driven, and more focused on the conditions that need to be set in for you to achieve a goal, to be thinking about that. So
it's my favorite. I stuck it. It's the last chapter of the book. Awesome. Would love to hear your take on it one day.
For sure, man. I'm going to totally read that and mark it up because that is so powerful. It's so powerful. Awesome. All right. Anything else related to the book? I can't wait to get my hands on it, to be honest with you. Like, it's speaking my language and it's in the context of staying at work, which I think all the rage is some of the stuff I get into a little bit where it's, let's go create our dreams. Let's go build businesses. But like, there is such an amazing opportunity to increase your happipiness 5-10 fold and enjoy that process of your life of going to work by just shifting a few things, a few perspective shifts, a few tactic changes, and you can make your grass, way greener than it is. So do you have anything else that you want to leave us with on the book? And then I just have a couple of wrap-up questions for you.
I mean, I think you mostly touched on it, and I think it's this idea that if you take the grass is greener idea, a lot of thinking out there is, well, if I just worked less, it would be better. If I had more money, it would be better. It's like, well, what would you be doing? Most people I talk to have some level of ambition, which is not satisfied by do the minimum amount necessary to scrape by in my life. There's something that you want to accomplish, something that you want to do. And that's why I think, the idea of just cutting back, balance, so to speak. If I spend less hours at work, that's going to fix it. Like, sometimes it will, but I think not in most cases. And it really just this idea that work can become a very positive driver for you in your life. And it's about how you're working, not what you're doing. That will have the biggest impact for folks. So, it's dive in, have a read. Would love to hear what folks think.
Awesome. The grass is greener. Very cool. Can't wait to get my hands on it. Thanks a lot for sharing that with us. All right. Couple of wrap-up questions that I got for you in sort of rapid fire style.
Speed round. I like it.
Yeah. So what would you say, you told me you read a lot of books. What would you say is the number one book that's had the biggest influence on you?
That's hard to narrow it down to one single book. The Courage to Be Disliked is one that I recommend very cautiously. The reason why is it's translated originally from Japanese. And my experience reading the book was it doesn't flow in the way that some books, flow for me. But it's about philosophy, and it really shoved my thinking to be like, how are you thinking about certain things in your life? And it created a pretty amazing perspective shift for me. So maybe that would be one that I would recommend just based on the way that we had our conversation. But there's probably, you pick a topic, I could probably go for days. I'm a big fan of reading.
What do you think was the most influential book that you maybe read while you were coping with your sister's death?
When Breath Becomes Air, I think. or this one, lots of people have probably heard of, but like Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. For me, When Breath Becomes Air just spoke to me in a moment. I have a vivid memory of, I don't want to like spoil the book, but it's about a guy who's doctor. He's in med school. He's so focused on charging through and being an incredible doctor. He gets diagnosed with cancer, and it's his story. He had such a unique blend of an incredible ability to write and all the medical knowledge to explain what was actually happening to his body, that it just kind of hit me in a way where I was like, I couldn't put into words the way I was feeling and what was going on. And that book just landed in that particular moment.
Excellent.
It's a tough read, but
yeah,
I highly recommend it.
My wife has read that book. She's a physician, and she's read that book. I have not, but I have read Man's Search for Meaning, and that was very powerful and influential in my life as well.
Yeah.
Very good. It can be dense, but no,
it's really good. It's again not the simplest read to get through. There are many lighter books out there for sure.
Yeah. All right. How about an influencer, thought leader, writer, or somebody that you've come across recently that has really caught your attention on the subject that you're interested in, that you think people need to know more about, besides yourself, obviously?
Yeah, that would be a very egotistical thing to say in this particular moment. I'm kind of blinders on right now. And, I think that it's like what's getting me about your question is right now in this moment.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Adam Grant, as many people are. I just like that he kind of approaches things in a bit of a different way. And I want to come up with an answer for you that is like more interesting than that. I think a topic that for a lot of folks that are, big into, how they're achieving and what that looks like. I'm a big fan of a lot of neuroscience. And I think an author who does a great job of that is David Eagleman. He wrote a book called Livewired. Very interesting stuff around like the way your brain works and what that means for the way you interact with the world. He's got a couple books in that particular space. So, I would go there, but I just find overall that there are a lot of platitudes. Everyone's telling me to like work smarter, not harder, love what you do and you'll never work a day in your life. And I'm like, yeah, okay, these look nice on a mug, but like,
exactly.
It's not, and I don't see a lot of people drilling down as deeply as I would like them to like, hey, that's true. And here's how to do that.
Yeah.
That's the thing that I'm really trying to accomplish. It's not to say that they're not out there, but a bit harder to find because it doesn't fit on a mug as nicely.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I'm left so often with, okay, but how? Like, how do you like, what are this? Yeah. What works? How do you do that? So I totally agree with you. All right. Last question is, we've got a lot of crazy negativity in the world. I want to know what has got you really excited about the next 12 months. You can't say your book. Okay. You got to think about something else. Can't say your book, but like leave us with some positivity.
My answer is going to be like, it's going to feel boring, but like, I'm excited to spend the next 365 days the way that I've been spending my days previously. Like I've got a lot of things for me on the work front that are, firing, which is great. I'm fortunate that, I live on a lake, so I get to look at water every day, which is amazing. And I'm kind of 4 years into a surfing journey. So I'm learning how to surf, and I don't get to surf right now, but in a couple months, I'll be going for a couple months with the family where I get to surf every day. And I'm like fired up as all hell to like get back in the water, get on a surfboard. Like last season, it just started clicking for me where, I wouldn't say I'm great yet, but like I at least look like I can hold my own in the water. And I'm excited to have a full surf season of like, I'm not flailing around like a maniac anymore. I can, ride the waves. And so my wife will laugh at me later when she hears I talked about surfing on a podcast where we're supposed to talk about work, but she won't be shocked. I'm pretty obsessed with it. So
that's awesome. Where's your surf spot?
Rincon, Puerto Rico. Maybe I shouldn't tell people that. Don't go. It's
Terrible spot.
it's terrible. It's terrible. You won't like it at all. I'd like to go surfing in a bunch of other places too. Now that I'm learning how, I grew up snowboarding and windsurfing and things like that, water skiing. For me, surfing is like, I love it. And the whole world of surfing has opened up to me. And the problem is it's a bit of an obsession once you get bitten by the bug. Have you ever been?
I have. I've been surfing in San Diego a couple times, had some friends that lived out there in the cold, like 55-degree water. It had a couple sharks swim under us while we were out there, which was all right. But yeah, it's like the ultimate flow sport, I feel like. And you're in it, you're in the water. It's beautiful, it was soothing. It was also rigorous, all at the same time. Yeah, it's not an obsession for me, but it's definitely something I could get into if I lived in a spot where I could do it often. Very cool. All right. Last question is, tell us where people can find more about you, your book, your work, and anything else that you want to leave them with.
Cool. Yeah. What do I want to leave them with? Huge thank you for listening to the episode. If you made it this far, that's great. I know you got time. You can spend it on almost anything you want, and you're hanging out with us, which is awesome. I love connecting with people. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find there. The book itself, yourgrassisgreener.com. That'll take you to the book or my website, which is thejasonsilver.com. It sounds a little bit egotistical, but there are a lot of people named Jason Silver. There are two that show up above me in a Google search. One is a Christian rock artist, and the other is a dating coach for women. So I'm not them. I'm the Jason Silver. That's how you can find me that way. Through the website, you can jump onto my newsletter if that's the thing that's interesting for you. I share tactics pretty much like every other week, something like that you can try in the office. And through that, you can fire me an email anytime. And if anything I've done, said, talked about, pointed towards has been impactful for you, I'd love to hear. And vice versa, if you tried a thing and it flopped on its face, I'd love to hear why and learn from your experience. So just always interested to meet new people, and hopping over to the website's the best way to do it.
Awesome. Well, we will have show notes to everything that we mentioned here and all of those. I guess, links.
Sorry, also the book's coming out. I'm supposed to do that, right? September 2nd, the book drops, and the business side of it is, if you pick it up that week, that would be super.
Yep. Go get it. I'm going to digest it as soon as it's out as well. Love having authors on, love hearing from people who have new and unique takes, and our listeners know that and expect that. So that's fantastic. Best of luck with the book. Like I said, we're going to have show notes and links to everything that's said on this podcast. And so people can always navigate to that page over at careercloud.com and find all the links. Jason, thank you so much for all your time today. This has been an amazing conversation. I am so proud to have gotten to meet you and share this time with you. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it's very mutual. Thank you for having me on, man. I really appreciate it. Appreciate you giving me a chance to speak to your audience, and it's great to get to know you. And next time, if we do talk, I got to come with my hat game much higher up. I've seen you like to wear all sorts of different hats, and I'll make sure next time I know the dress code coming in.
Yep. I think definitely we'll do a round two at some point. We're going to definitely want to hear how the book all went, and I'm certainly going to want to keep up on all of your thought leadership. So let's do a round two, and we'll coordinate hat games when we do. All right. Thanks a lot. Have a great rest of your week.